Hey students, it's Mr. Clausen here. I just wanted to go through what we mean when we talk about atomic notation.
So often when you look at the periodic table, you'll see a tile that looks something like this. It's got some letters and some numbers on it, and we want to see what's going on with it. So as you probably already knew, the first one there is the element's symbol. So it's a 1 or 2 letter abbreviation that's a symbol. Some make sense like carbon does, and others are weird like silver, which is Ag, and it's just because it's based on the Latin name. The one below it is typically the element's name. Then let's go take a look at the numbers. The one on top, the smaller number, is what is unique about that element for it. So it's the atomic number, and if we remember from before, that is the number of protons that are in for that one. So carbon happens to have 6 protons. Then you'll often see a number down at the bottom or maybe up to the other side, but it's always a bigger number, and it's usually written as a decimal. Now what that's trying to show us is the atomic mass, or sometimes called the mass number. But the question is, why is it always written with these weird numbers, these decimal things after it? If it's just supposed to be the number of protons plus the number of neutrons, how can you get these fractions of a proton and fractions of a neutron? And the answer is you can't, but as we learned in a previous video, there are things called isotopes out there, and so some atoms of an element might have an extra neutron or 2, and what this does is it changes the mass, and what they list on the periodic table is simply just an average of all those numbers. So this says on average a carbon atom would have a mass of 12.011. However, you'll never actually find any carbon atom that has exactly that mass. You'll have some that are 12 and some that are 13, but you never find one that was exactly 12.01 because it's just not possible. All right, then what I wanted to bring up was this. Sometimes you'll see the elements written as follows. You see the big letter, and then there's some numbers around it in each one of those locations. And those locations are important to us. So if you look at the element, it has different locations, and those locations are important to us for what those numbers mean. So if you look at the one down at the bottom, it's the smaller number. You'll notice that it's the 6, just like we saw before. And so down in that location, that is actually the atomic number, which is the number of protons that atom specifically has. Then up above, you will often see the bigger one, but you'll notice now it's not written as a decimal. It's written, it's been rounded. And what this is referring to is the number of protons and neutrons that this atom has. So it's the protons plus the neutrons that this specific atom has, which would be 12. And occasionally what you'll see sometimes is there's a number actually listed up over here. So for example, carbon could have this. And what that's referring to is the charge on the atom, to be if it's an ion or not. So carbon does have the ability to gain lose electrons for the most part. And in this case, if it had a charge of 2+, what that would mean is it had 2 more protons than it did electrons. So what this one had to do is it had to have lost 2 electrons in order to get that charge.
So the next thing we need to talk about now is just how to name this. At first glance, you might be calling it just carbon. Remember, elements get the lowercase letter in front. However, we need to be very careful about which carbon we're talking about. Take a look there at the average atomic mass. It says that the average is 12.01, and the reason for that is that some carbons have more neutrons than others. Remember, those are called isotopes. Carbon 12 and carbon 14 are the most common isotopes, so normally it's 6 protons, 6 neutrons. But sometimes there's a few extra neutrons making it carbon 14. So in this case, because the protons plus the neutrons equals 12, we would rename this one and call it carbon-12. All right, so let's review what we've been talking about. The atomic number is the number of protons. Typically, this is equal to the number of electrons if everything is neutral. Sometimes it's not. You have an ion. You would know that if you look in the upper right, it'll tell you a charge. Positive means it lost electrons. Negative means it gained. And then the other thing we need to do is that we need to get the name using the atomic mass. And to get that, you add the protons plus the neutrons. Now, calculating out the number of neutrons can be a little bit trickier, so we'll watch that in the next video.